So dating has changed a lot. I know back in the day, like if you were trying to date someone, you'd go out, try to meet somebody. If you were really struggling and you wanted to try to find somebody, you might try the classified ads in the newspaper. Now, I know that requires some explanation because some of you don't know what a newspaper is. So back in the 1900s, we had these big sheets of paper that we would all read, and there were classified ads, and people would post ads that would say something like, if you like pina coladas and getting caught in the rain. And then somebody else would say, oh yeah, I like that. I'm not into yoga. I like champagne, things like that. You like try to connect. We don't do it that way anymore, right? Now we have apps for all of that. And so I don't know all about the different apps. And I thought, well, I'll list them all. And then I'm like, I don't want to do that. But the idea is basically you look at these apps and you're like, well, do I want to connect with this person or not? And then you swipe right if you do and you swipe left if you don't. And I was thinking, what would make a good like about me section for a dating profile? And I thought, what I wouldn't want to see if I was looking in one of these profiles, what I wouldn't want to see is someone who said, I promise that I will be unfaithful. I'm a big flirt and I can't help myself. And so I'm going to make you think that I love you. I'm going to make you think that we're connected, but I'm really going to run around behind your back all the time. I'm going to break your heart. I'm going to leave you. It's almost like the reverse of Rick Astley, right? I am going to break your heart. I am going to let you down. I am going to give you up, right? And you see this profile, and I'm guessing that most people would see a profile like that and you would swipe left. You'd say, I don't want any part of that. And this is why it's so shocking to us that in the Bible, God actually comes to a prophet and says, that's the kind of girl I want you to find. So the guy's name is Hosea. And his book, Hosea, it's in the Old Testament. You start turning there if you want. We're going to be in chapter 1 and chapter 3 today. But in Hosea 1, God comes to Hosea and he's commissioning him to be a prophet. And Hosea's job is going to be to preach to the northern tribes of Israel. So the 10 tribes of the north are called Israel. The 2 tribes of the south are called Judah. They're 2 separate countries by this point, and neither of them are doing well. Israel is just full of idolatry, and God is going to send Hosea to preach to them. And you know what? Let's just look and see what God says to Hosea. All right, so Hosea chapter 1, verse 2, it says, when the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, go, marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her. Now, this doesn't seem like a very fun assignment, does it? What we don't know is exactly what the timeline is here. We don't know if God was saying, Hosea, go find a woman that's promiscuous and marry her, or if he's saying, Hosea, go get married, and by the way, your wife is going to be promiscuous. It could be either way. Neither is good, right? Neither is an assignment that everybody's jumping at. God says, I want you to do that, and then there's a second part to the command, which is, and have children, which seems like a terrible idea. Because we know that when 2 people are having relational dysfunction, one of the most difficult things you can do is add more children into the mix. It becomes more and more difficult relationally. And yet that's God's command to Hosea. And it kind of leaves us shaking our heads a little bit, as we're going to do several times this morning. It leaves us shaking our heads a little bit saying, why would God do this? And the answer is he wanted to get Israel's attention. Israel was in such a bad place that God was going to go to drastic means to get their attention, beginning with using his prophet as an object lesson, as an illustration of what Israel was doing and where their relationship with God was headed. In fact, this is what he says right here in verse 2. He says, for like an adulterous wife, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord. God says to Hosea, Israel is being unfaithful to me, just like an adulterous wife. Now, I think you guys understand that when we read the Bible, we're reading true stories, and they teach us a lot about God. Sometimes they're historical lessons like this one, teaching us some things about Israel, but there's also something there for us as well, right? And so I don't think it's a stretch for me to say right from the get-go, I hope you understand that a part of this whole passage is helping us to recognize our own unfaithfulness. The places where maybe we've slipped a little bit. For Israel, they had slipped into literal idolatry. They were building idols of Baal and worshiping them instead of God. Now, we don't do that, right? You don't drive down the street, oh, there's an idol of Baal. There's an Ashtaroth pole. We don't do that anymore. but we still have idolatry. In fact, I would go as far as to say idolatry is still rampant, and it's very easy for us sometimes to get sucked into it. Let me give you three ways to kind of test your idolatry, all right? So if you want to know, are you being idolatrous? Here's 3 questions you can ask. Question number 1 is, on what am I depending? Right? What am I depending on? So who am I counting on to take care of me? Who am I counting on to provide for me, to protect me? And it's easy for us sometimes to think, well, I need to depend most on my job or my education or my friends or my politicians or whatever else it may be. And often it all comes back to I need to depend on me. But you understand, whenever we depend on anything or anyone other than God, we are slipping towards idolatry. Now, for Hosea, you'll see in chapter 2, if you want to read that on your own, they were depending on Baal for their crops, for their sustenance, for their provision, for their protection. And God says, you need to stop depending on Baal. I mean, there's a great irony here, right? Baal is made out of wood. Who provided that wood? God did. And so they were taking God's provision and making an idol and then thinking the idol somehow provided what they had made the idol out of. God says, stop that. For us, it's a little more subtle. Are we depending more on ourselves than we do on God? Are we depending more on our job, on our country? Are we depending more on those around us, whatever it may be? But who am I depending on? The second question is, what am I distracted by? It's so easy in life to get distracted by the shiny things around us, isn't it? Mary Ann and I were watching dog racing yesterday. Not like where they run around the track, but this was really cool. That just one dog at a time running down this 100-yard track, right? So it's just this lane they run down. They basically had a bunch of white plastic bags on a rope, and they pull the rope, and the dogs chase it because they think it's awesome. And it was really cool to watch because they have like these really high-def cameras zoomed in close on the dog so they could make them run and they do it in super slow-mo. So the dogs are like... slobbers going everywhere. And these dogs, some of them were absolutely amazing to watch them run. But as we were watching, there was one dog who's really fast and just like running really fast. And then all of a sudden, the dog saw something. He's like, and just kind of veers off. It's like, squirrel. It got distracted. This is idolatry. Idolatry is when we're running the race. We got our eyes on Jesus. We know where we should be going. We're heading that direction, and then we see something. It's like, ooh, I'm going to chase that for a little bit. And so often we start to chase the things that look good, or the things that feel good, or the things that we think will make us look good. And they take us away from Jesus, and all of a sudden our eyes are no longer on him, our eyes are on something else. That's idolatry. Because idolatry is just being distracted by the world. So what am I depending on? What am I distracted by? Here's the third question I can ask myself. Is what am I devoted to? That's not a word we use very often. What am I devoted to? But devotion is like this mix of love and action. What do I love the most, and how do my actions show that? So my calendar can often tell me what I'm devoted to. Right? I look at my calendar and see how I'm spending my time. So if somebody else were to look at my calendar, would they say, wow, this is a guy that loves Jesus? Or would they say, oh, this is a guy who loves golf? This is a guy who loves to watch TV. I don't think anybody puts that on their calendar. You shouldn't. If you do, you have a problem. Right? 4 o'clock Tuesday, watch TV. Does your calendar show that you're devoted to Jesus, or does it show maybe there's some other things that are competing for your devotion? What about your bank account? If you look at all the transactions you've made over the past month, would somebody look at the way you're using your money and say, wow, that person really loves Jesus? Or would they say, wow, that person really loves McDonald's? Or wherever else it may be. You see, how we spend our money is a sign of our devotion. How we spend our time is a sign of our devotion. And whatever it is that we're devoted to, that's what we serve. And if we're devoted to something other than Jesus, then that is idolatry. So as we go through this story of Hosea, it's going to be really easy for us to sit on the outside and judge Israel because they were pretty awful. And they were a lot more awful than us. We're going to see that next week. When we talk about what Baal worship actually involved, we're going to be like, oh man, those people were terrible. But don't miss the point that we may not be idolatrous in the same way or to the same level, but we also are idolatrous at times. And when we are, that pulls us away from God. And so just like God is trying to draw Israel back to himself, God is trying to draw us back to ourselves. And in Hosea, he has to use some pretty extreme measures. All right, so here we go. Hosea chapter 1, verse 3, it says, so he married Gomer. So Hosea is obedient. He does what God says. He marries this lady named Gomer, daughter of Diblaim. I guess if your name is Diblaim, you can name your daughter Gomer. And she conceived and bore him a son. And then the Lord said to Hosea, call him Jezreel, because I will soon punish the house of Jehu for the massacre at Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of Israel. In that day, I will break Israel's bow in the valley of Jezreel. All right, there's three pieces to this prophecy. This is a prophecy that Hosea is putting out. Piece number one, he's going to bring an end to the reign of the family of Jehu. So that's the current dynasty in Israel. Jehu's not king anymore. It's one of his descendants, but it's the line of Jehu, and God says, I'm going to put an end to the line of Jehu. Number two, he's going to destroy the kingdom of Israel. Right? They're going to be gone. No more Israel, no more northern tribes. Number three, it's going to happen in battle in this place called the Valley of Jezreel. Now understand, Jezreel is a city in Israel. King Ahab made it the capital city, so it's the capital city of Israel. It's also this valley that's outside of the city that's commonly also called the Valley of Megiddo. And some of you, your ears are perking up. Now you're, wait, I've heard of that place, the Valley of Megiddo, because I know that at the end of all things, there is a great battle fought at the Valley of Megiddo. We call it the Battle of Armageddon. It's actually a battle in the Bible, not a movie about an asteroid hitting the earth. I mean, it is both, but one of them's true. All right, so the Valley of Jezreel is this place where the judgment of God is going to happen. Now, God is judging the house of Jehu, because Jehu was a king who did a few things right and a lot of things wrong. He was commissioned by God to put an end to the reign of Ahab and Jezebel, the worst kings Israel ever had. And he did that. He killed Ahab, he killed Jezebel, but then he kept killing. He killed all of their family, he killed all their servants, he killed all their priests, he killed anybody that was loyal to them. He went way too far. That's why God says, I'm going to hold Jehu's house accountable for the massacre that happened at Jezreel. He went too far. He also didn't go far enough, because after destroying Ahab and Jezebel, he put an end to the Baal worship. That didn't last because he didn't put an end to the other idolatry, and he didn't turn the people back to God. And so Jehu, at the final standards, was determined to not be a good king, because while he obeyed a little, he didn't obey in everything, which is a powerful reminder to us that partial obedience is disobedience, and that doing the right thing the wrong way is still the wrong thing, because God's standards are so high for us. So he's going to judge the house of Jehu. He's going to judge the nation of Israel, beginning with a battle that will be fought in the Valley of Jezreel. And by the way, all of this came to pass within 100 years of Hosea's lifetime. Within 100 years of Hosea's lifetime, Israel had been completely destroyed, wiped off the face of the earth, destroyed by the Assyrian armies. All of it came true. So Hosea begins his prophecy by saying, Jezreel. My son's name is Jezreel. So every time you hear my son's name, I want you to remember that Jezreel is a place of judgment. And then he had another kid. All right, so here we go. Next verse 6. Gomer conceived again and gave birth to a daughter. Now I want you to see something here. Here it says Gomer conceived and gave birth. In verse 3 it says she conceived and bore him a son. Do you see what's missing from the first one to the second one? In verse 3, it's she bore him a son. Here is she just had a daughter. This is not an accident, right? What we're seeing here is the beginnings of Gomer's unfaithfulness. There's a question about this daughter. Whose is it? Is it Hosea's? Is it not Hosea's? We're not sure, because we know that at this point, Gomer has begun to be unfaithful. And then the Lord said to Hosea, call her Lo Ruhamah, which actually sounds kind of cool until you realize what it means, which means not loved. For I will no longer show love to Israel, that I should at all forgive them. Yet I will show love to Judah, and I will save them, not by bow, sword, or battle, or by horses and horsemen, but I, the Lord their God, will save them. So this is kind of a rotten deal for Hosea's daughter. Can you imagine that first day of kindergarten? The teacher's reading off the names. All right, is Jimmy here? Here. Sally here? Here. Is not loved here? Here. Why would God say, name your child not loved? And even more, why would God even want to say this to Israel? Why would God even want to say to Israel, you're not loved anymore? And what's fascinating is he says, but by the way, Judah is still loved, right? So those two tribes to the south, that other country, they're still loved. And what Hosea is prophesying here is that when Israel is destroyed, Judah won't be. And that's exactly what happens. Sennacherib comes and he destroys the 10 tribes to the north, Israel, and he marches on Jerusalem, the capital of Judah. But God intervenes. And we talked about this a couple of months ago. Sennacherib surrounds Jerusalem. Everybody's in a panic. We're going to fall to the Assyrians. And God sends Isaiah the prophet to Hezekiah the king with a message that I'm going to protect you, not by your own strength, not by bows or swords or shields or horses or horsemen, not by your own strength, but by my strength. I will save you because I am your God. But to Israel, he says, you're not loved anymore. And here's where we shake our heads again, right? Because this doesn't seem like the God we know. Isn't God, he's defined by love. So why would he say this? I'm reminded of Romans 1. In Romans 1, Paul is writing, and several times he uses the phrase, so God gave them up. Which is essentially to say, God said, I'm going to let you have your way. You want to run away from me? You want to live your way instead of my way? You want to be distracted by everything the world has to offer? Okay, I'm going to take my hands off. I'm going to give you up to what you want. Let's see how this goes. And the idea here is that God, in releasing control and by not stepping in and intervening, is giving an act of mercy. He is mercifully releasing people so they can experience a small taste of life without God and realize that they don't want that for eternity. And so God says, I'm going to give you a small taste of what it's like to be without me. You're not loved. You're going to get a small taste of life without me so that hopefully you will return and repent and can experience eternity with me. And then Gomer has another child, verse 8. After she had weaned Lo Ruhamah, Gomer had another son. And you see the trajectory, right? Now there's not even any doubt anymore. We're not even trying to pretend at this point. She's pregnant again. And we all know it's because she's unfaithful, right? So then the Lord said, call him Lo Ami, which means not my people. For you are not my people, and I am not your God. This feels a little bit like the passage we saw last week in 2 Chronicles, when at the end of the fall of Judah, God said, and nothing could be done. Remember, God sent his messengers, the people wouldn't listen. And it's like, well, and nothing more could be done. That feels like this, doesn't it? God says, that's it. You're not mine. I'm not yours. And this feels dark, and it feels final, and it feels very painful. And again, it doesn't feel like the God that we know. But I think there's hope here. Because when I read this verse, when I see this picture of God saying, not mine, I think of a time 700 years later in Jerusalem when Jesus is hanging on the cross and God looks at his son and says, not mine. Remember this? Jesus is hanging on the cross and he says, Father, why have you forsaken me? Why have you abandoned me? Why am I not yours anymore? What is going on in that moment? You see, Israel deserved what they got. They had earned it. They had run so far from God and stayed away from him for so long. God was perfectly just and perfectly right to say, not mine. Because God cannot be with something that is not perfect, that is not holy, that is not righteous, because he himself is everything that is perfect and holy and righteous. But then we realize that this applies to us too. Because if God can't be with anything that is not perfect and holy and righteous, and I'm not perfect and holy and righteous, then God can't be with me. And I am not perfect and holy and righteous. And neither are you. And so God could, and he would be right and he would be just, say to us, not mine. That is what we have earned and that is what we have deserved. And that is why Jesus went to the cross. He who knew no sin became sin for us. He became what we are so that we could have the righteousness of God in him. He became what we are so that we could receive what he had. Get this. Jesus hangs on the cross and the Father says to him, not mine, so that the Father can say to us, mine. So Jesus launches his ministry by saying, everybody who believes in me gets the power to become sons of God. You can be a child of God. God will adopt you as his own. He will say, you are mine if you will put your faith in Jesus. That's why Jesus is on the cross. And so when we see God say to Israel, not mine, it feels hopeless. And it feels like maybe we should despair, and it feels like maybe it's the end, but there's this little twinkle of hope that there's still something yet to be done. And then we go to verse 10. And verse 10 says, yet. And here's another one of those great words in the Old Testament. Last week, we talked about the word then. This week, we talk about the word yet, which reminds us there's still something more. Right? It's not over. The last word has not been spoken. There's something yet to come. Yet the Israelites will be like the sand on the seashore, which cannot be measured or counted. Boy, we've changed directions, haven't we? We've gone from not loved, not mine. We've gone from Jezreel judgment to there will be more Israelites than you can possibly count. You see, Hosea is changing now. He's still making prophecies, but now he's making positive, hopeful prophecies. Promises of God, of things that he is going to do for his people. In the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, lo ami, they will be called children of the living God. How awesome is this? That he says, look, what you've earned, what you deserve, what I can justly give you is to say, not mine. But what I'm going to do, what I'm going to say is you are mine. Now there is a question for us here. And the question for us here is, has this happened? Has this happened yet? This is a prophecy. Has it been fulfilled? And we might say that in a spiritual sense, it has. In a spiritual sense, Jesus fulfilled this because Jesus made us gods and Jesus connected us to God, but we're not Israel. And so while we may, as the church of Jesus, be a spiritual fulfillment of this prophecy has not yet been fully fulfilled. There's still something more to come. In fact, Paul talks about this in Romans, and we're going to get more into it in the next couple of weeks as we work our way through the minor prophets, that a lot of these prophecies are yet to happen. Listen to the next thing that he says. He says, the people of Judah and the people of Israel will come together. The divide in the nation will be healed. So you have these two countries that have been at war with each other for hundreds of years. God's going to heal them. He's going to bring them together, and they will appoint one leader and will come up out of the land. That one leader is Jesus. Jesus is a descendant of David. God made a promise to David that for all of eternity, one of his descendants would sit on the throne of a united kingdom. And Jesus is the fulfillment of that. So when Jesus returns and when Jesus sits on his throne, he will unite Israel and Judah and he will reign forever and ever. But that hasn't happened yet. That's something that we can look forward to. Look how he ends the chapter. He says, for great will be the day of Jezreel. This is awesome. So remember, Jezreel is the place of judgment. It's a place where all the bad things happen. The battle of Armageddon. And so we think Jezreel bad. And now Hosea says, well, wait a minute. The day of Jezreel is coming. And another way we talk about this is we call it the day of the Lord. Peter talked about it in Acts 2. Joel talks about it. So in 2 weeks, when we get to Joel, we'll talk about much more about the day of the Lord then. But what Hosea is hinting at is, look, the place of judgment becomes a place of promise. The place of judgment becomes a place of healing. Where everything bad is about to happen for Israel, everything good is going to happen for Israel because this is who God is. You see, Hosea is saying Israel's unfaithfulness didn't cancel God's faithfulness. And that's true for us also. Because everything God does for us, everything God gives to us, he doesn't do because of what we do. We don't earn it. We can't earn it. We don't deserve it. Our performance purchases nothing. It's all based on the performance of Jesus. And because Jesus was perfectly righteous and Jesus was perfectly holy, and he gave himself for us, God's faithfulness extends to us in spite of our unfaithfulness. So the story here is not really about an unfaithful wife. Now, we look at the story, and then our first thought is poor Hosea. Because Hosea is a good guy. He's the best. He doesn't deserve any of this. And immediately, we want to associate ourselves with Hosea. Because all of us know what it's like to be hurt by someone else. Some in big ways, some in small ways. But all of us have felt the sting of betrayal, or of being let down, or of broken promises, or whatever else it may be. And so we quickly associate ourselves with Hosea and say, I get it, I know how he feels. But that's not the picture Hosea is painting. Do you understand that? In this picture, we're not Hosea, we're Gomer. But the point is not that God is angry with us for our unfaithfulness. The point is that God's faithfulness is bigger than our unfaithfulness. So we may look at ourselves and say, yeah, I do sometimes struggle with who I depend on. I sometimes depend on the wrong places. I do sometimes get distracted. There are times when my devotion is not directed where it can be. And when that happens, yes, I'm Gomer, I'm Israel, I'm unfaithful. But God's faithfulness is bigger. All right? That's what chapter 3 is all about. So jump ahead to chapter 3 and look what happens here. So now Gomer has gone into a downward spiral. She's not just been unfaithful to Hosea, she's left him. She's probably gone into a life of prostitution. Perhaps she's being trafficked. But however it is, now she is a slave. And she's being sold as a slave. And so Hosea now is going to go to the slave market to find his wife. Chapter 3, verse 1, the Lord said to me, go, show your love to your wife again, though she is loved by another man and is an adulteress. Love her as the Lord loves the Israelites. So this is the picture continuing on. It's not really about Gomer, it's about God. And it's not about her unfaithfulness, it's about God's faithfulness. And so God says to Hosea, I want you to go show love for your wife just like I still love Israel. Though they turn to other gods and love the sacred raisin cakes. Yes, we got to talk about that, right? What in the world? Like we're cruising along here, everything makes sense. Yeah, I get the picture, idolatry, unfaithfulness, adultery, Gomer's bad, Hosea's good, Gomer's us, Hosea's God, I get it, raisin cakes. And I'm like, do I have to change my Panera order now? Because I love the cinnamon raisin bagel. Is that a raisin cake? So let me try to unpack this because there's actually a really good lesson here for us. So at one level, the raisin cakes, they're part of the worship of the false gods, right? So in some of the religious ceremonies and rituals that Israel would do when they were worshiping false gods, there was this eating of sacred raisin cakes. And so at some level, that's what Hosea is talking about. He's just taking a shot at what's going on. But there's another sense in which Hosea is making this point that sometimes it's the little things that distract us from the big thing. Because other places in the Old Testament, there are sacred raisin cakes and they're not bad, right? And that King David sent raisin cakes home with all of the people of Israel as a gift to them. And so in one sense, the raisin cakes should remind us of our appetites because they're food and they're good food. And I think one of the things that Hosea is saying here is, hey, it's your appetites that have turned you away from God. Your appetites for false gods, your appetites for what the other nations are doing, your appetites for what distracts you, stuff that looks good, stuff that feels good, stuff that makes you look good. Whatever those appetites are, they're turning you away from God. And here's where we're like, okay, this makes a little more sense. Raising cakes doesn't make any sense to me. But you say that sometimes I have appetites that turn me away from God. Okay, I'm hearing that. And I'm understanding that. And okay, that's starting to hit home a little bit, that I have appetites that turn me from God. But it goes beyond that. Because the raisin cakes are actually a sign of prosperity. They were considered an absolute delicacy. Not everybody had raisin cakes. That's why King David sent them home to all the people. It's like, hey, here's something you never get, but because I want to do something good for you, here you go. And so someone who's eating raisin cakes is someone who's enjoying great prosperity. And I think this is actually Hosea's biggest point is, hey, Israel, your prosperity has turned you from God. And here's where I think, okay, there's a real correlation for us now, because we have all kinds of prosperity. And isn't it so easy for our prosperity to turn us from God? Sometimes we like to think, well, we're prosperous because we're so spiritual, right? That's God. God blesses us because we do so many good things. And so he, in return, gives us lots of good things. And while that certainly happens, sometimes it's not the rule. Material abundance is not necessarily a result of spiritual abundance. The most spiritually abundant person who ever walked the face of the earth was Jesus, and he didn't have a place to lay his head. So there's not necessarily always a correlation. In fact, the reality is that often prosperity turns us from God because we think we can depend on ourselves because we're who made ourselves prosperous. So here's Israel in this time of national prosperity, and they're thinking, hey, we're being prosperous because of ourselves or because of Baal or because of whatever else it may be, but it's certainly not because of God. We need to hear that there's a real danger that sometimes when we have things really good, we forget about God. And so God's trying to get their attention. He's saying, hey, put down the raisin cakes. I know they taste good. Put down the raisin cakes and start being grateful to the person who made the raisins. Be aware that when life is good, when you're experiencing prosperity, that's not a bad thing in and of itself, but don't let it turn you away from God. So God says, Hosea, go show love to your wife, just like I love Israel, even though they eat the raisin cakes. Verse 2, Hosea says, so I bought her for 15 shekels of silver and about a homer and a lethek of barley. So Hosea goes to the slave auction. And you guys can see that Hosea is a picture of Jesus, right? Gomer's a picture of us, a picture of Israel. We're enslaved by what distracts us. We're enslaved by what we've decided to depend on. We're enslaved by what we've devoted ourselves to. And now here comes Jesus, sent by the Father. And for Hosea, this has to be a humiliating walk, because everybody knows that's his wife up there. And he goes and he says, I want to buy her. Now, the going price for slaves was 30 shekels of silver. But it appears that Hosea didn't have that. So they got 15. So he gives them everything he has, and then he says, can we bargain? Can we negotiate? I'll go home, I'll get food. I'll bring you as much food as I need to. So he brings these measurements, and they're ancient. We don't know precisely what they are. We can compare other sources and figure out that the food he's giving here is somewhere between several weeks worth of food and several months worth of food. Either way you slice it, he's giving up everything. That's the picture. Hosea is willing to do whatever it takes to rescue his wife. He's willing to give everything to bring her home. Now, just for a minute, think about what Gomer is feeling in this moment. She's standing up there. She's made all kinds of horrible life decisions. And there's her husband that she's been unfaithful for, that she's left, that she's abandoned, that she's deserted, that she's treated so horribly. And I don't know, maybe her kids are there with him. Little Jezreel, Lo Ruhamah, Lo Amin, they're all standing right there, and they're seeing their mother like that. Imagine what she's going through. Imagine what she's feeling. She's feeling fear. Why is he here to buy me? What is he going to do to me? Does he want vengeance? She's probably feeling shame. Everybody knows who she is. Everybody knows what she's done. She's certainly feeling regret. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have made those choices. I shouldn't have followed that path. And I imagine she's feeling a great sense of doubt. What's next? Is there hope for me? And she watches as Hosea buys her and gives up everything so he can buy her. The story doesn't tell us when they have this conversation, like if they're walking home and he says this to her, or they get home and he sits her down and he makes her some tea and says, we got to talk, Gomer. But I want you to see how Hosea's words speak into what's going on in Gomer's mind and her heart. He says, you are to live with me. He's brought her home. Many days. It means a long, long time. And you must not be a prostitute or be intimate with any man, and I will behave the same to you. You need to be faithful to me because I'm going to be faithful to you. But do you see how Hosea's words speak into what's going on in Gomer's life? Did you see how he says, you don't need to be afraid, I'm not going to punish you. You don't need to be ashamed. I took shame for you. He humiliated himself for her so she didn't have to feel that shame anymore. He rescued her from it. He said, you don't need to regret anymore because I'm not holding the past against you. There were no words of let's talk about what happened. Only future words, right? He said, I don't want you to doubt yourself, Gomer. I believe in you. I have a calling for you. Here's what our new life together looks like. And of course, you can see how this is exactly what Jesus does for us. But please notice the order in which this happens. It starts with Gomer's unfaithfulness. But then comes Hosea's deliverance. He buys her back. He pays the price. He brings her home. He restores her. And only then does he say, now you live for me. This is what God does for us. Listen, Hosea did not go to the slave market and say, hey, Gomer, are you going to be faithful? If you're going to be faithful, I'll buy you out of this. But if you're not going to be faithful, then no deal. That's not what he did. He didn't go to the slave owner and say, look, Gomer, I'm going to pay for this, but if you don't stick to your end of the deal, I'm sending you right back out. Doesn't say any of that. He says, I'm going to buy you, I'm going to rescue you, I'm going to restore you, and now you can live for me. This is what God does for us. God is not in heaven today saying to you, if you'll just get it right, then I'll save you. God is not up in heaven saying, look, if you'll just commit to be faithful, then maybe we can have a relationship. No, he already paid the price. He sent Jesus. Jesus was the price for our freedom. He already restored us. He already brought us home. And now he says to us, because I've done all of that, now you can live the life you were called to live. My salvation is not dependent on how I live. It's dependent on Jesus. And my restoration with God is not dependent on my faithfulness. It's dependent on his faithfulness. And the same is true for you. Gomer needed to respond to this incredible gift. And I think there's at least three ways that she needed to respond. I think the first thing is she needed to repent. She needed to acknowledge that she had been wrong. Not to earn anything from Hosea. He already gave her that, right? She needed to do it for herself. She needed to acknowledge that she was wrong so that she could receive fully within herself the forgiveness that Hosea was offering. Secondly, she needed to commit herself going forward to live the life she was called to live, a life of faithfulness. And finally, she had to live a life of gratitude. Don't you imagine that every morning Gomer woke up, her very first thought was, I'm home. I'm loved. I'm his. And don't you think her heart was overwhelmed with the gratitude for what Hosea had done for her, and that gratitude spilled out into how she treated him and how she lived her life? And those three responses need to be our response this morning. I think some, probably all of us, need to do some repenting. There are things in our lives. Maybe we've been distracted. Maybe we've been depending on the wrong things. Maybe our devotion has been in the wrong place. But we need to say, I was wrong. Not to earn anything from God, not to gain his forgiveness. He's granted that already. But so that we can receive it fully within ourselves. I think we need to commit ourselves today, moving forward, to live the lives he's called us to live out the faithfulness he's demonstrated to us. And finally, we need to live lives of gratitude. Every morning, we should remind ourselves, I'm home, I'm loved, I'm his. And let that be the driving force in the way that we live our lives. My guess is that one of those feels bigger to you, and you can pick and choose and say, this is the one I really need to focus on today. I hope you'll do that. I hope that before you even leave today, you're going to do business with God and say, God, this is what I need to change. This is what I need to do differently. I can't believe how much you've done for me, and I want to do something for you in return. I'm going to pray right now and give you a chance to talk to him while I do. Father,